What kind of son tells a man to disappear from his own family with a single text message? How does a calm father go from being erased in the middle of the night to holding every card by morning? When my son told me I was no longer family, I replied that I would transfer the house and car tomorrow, just not to him. What he never understood was how long I'd been preparing for this moment. As the story unfolds, take a moment to like, hit the hype button, subscribe, and write in the comments. Would you forgive him or walk away? The phone vibrated at 11:47 p.m. I was sitting in my kitchen, finishing a cup of tea, when the screen lit up with Nathaniel's name. My son, 29 years old, married for 3 years to a woman who seemed to rewrite his personality one paragraph at a time. I picked up the phone expecting the usual. A request for money, maybe an excuse for missing another weekend visit. What I got instead made the tea go cold in my hand. Dad, we need to make this clear. You're no longer family. Mara and I have discussed this extensively, and we've decided that your presence in our lives is no longer beneficial or welcome. Please don't call. Please don't visit. We need space to build our future without your interference. This is final. I read it 3 times. Each word felt like it had been chosen from a script. The phrasing was too polished, too deliberate. Nathaniel didn't talk like that. He never had. Even as a kid, he stumbled over his words, apologized for taking up space, asked permission before having opinions. This was Mara's voice, her rhythm, her vocabulary. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and stared at the message for another minute. The overhead light hummed. Outside, a car passed by slowly, its headlights sweeping across the wall. I felt something inside me click into place. Not anger, not even hurt, just clarity. I picked up the phone and typed back. Understood. I'll transfer the house and car tomorrow. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. He was typing. Or she was typing using his phone. Probably the latter. The response came fast. Make it fast. 2 words. No punctuation except the period. Cold and efficient. I locked the phone and placed it face down on the table. The house was quiet. I'd lived here for 32 years, bought it when Nathaniel was 2 years old, back when his mother was still alive and we were still pretending everything was going to be fine. She left when he was 7, took half of nothing and disappeared into a new life in Oregon with a man who sold insurance and drove a convertible. I raised Nathaniel alone after that, worked 2 jobs for 6 years until I could get a better position at the logistics company, taught him to ride a bike, helped him with algebra, sat through every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game where he mostly stood in the wrong position and apologized when the ball came near him. He'd been a sweet kid, nervous but sweet, the kind of boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on a beetle, who asked if I was okay when I came home tired, who used to leave drawings on the refrigerator with messages like "Best Dad" spelled in backwards letters. Then he met Mara. It started slowly. First, it was little comments. Dad, Mara says you shouldn't wear that shirt to dinner. It's too casual. Or, Dad, can you not tell that story? Mara thinks it makes you sound old-fashioned. Then it was the holidays. We're doing Thanksgiving with Mara's family this year. They have a bigger house. Christmas. Mara's parents are hosting. It's just easier. Then it was the visits. I'd drive 40 minutes to their apartment, knock on the door, and Nathaniel would open it with an apologetic smile. Hey, Dad, come in. Mara's not feeling great, so maybe keep it short? I'd sit on their couch, the one I'd helped them move in, and watch as Mara floated through the apartment in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, sighing dramatically, checking her phone, making pointed comments about how tired she was from her job at the marketing firm. Nathaniel would sit beside her, his hand on her knee, nodding along like a dashboard ornament. I remembered one visit in particular. It was late April. I'd brought over a bookshelf I'd built in my garage. Solid oak. Took me 3 weekends to finish. I thought they could use it for all the books Mara kept stacking on the floor. I carried it up 2 flights of stairs by myself. Nathaniel met me at the door and looked at it as if I'd brought him something lifeless and unwanted. Dad, we didn't ask for this. I know. I just thought you could use it. Mara appeared behind him, arms crossed. Alan, we're trying to keep the apartment minimal. We don't need more furniture. It's a gift, I said. She smiled the way people smile when they're trying to be patient with someone who doesn't understand social cues. We appreciate the thought, but no thank you. Nathaniel looked at the floor. Sorry, Dad. I carried the bookshelf back down to my truck and drove home. I still had it in the garage, leaning against the wall, gathering dust. That was 8 months ago. Since then, the visits had become shorter, the phone calls less frequent, the excuses more elaborate, and now, tonight, this message. You're no longer family. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked into the living room. The house was too big for one person. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard I used to mow every Saturday. I hadn't mowed it in weeks. There didn't seem to be much point. I sat down in the armchair by the window and looked out at the street. The neighborhood was quiet. A few porch lights still on, most people asleep. I thought about the message again, about the phrase no longer beneficial or welcome, about the cold efficiency of it, about the fact that my son hadn't even called, hadn't even given me the respect of hearing my voice one last time before severing everything. I thought about Mara, sitting beside him, maybe with her hand on his shoulder, watching him type, coaching him, telling him what to say, making sure he didn't soften it, making sure he didn't apologize, and I thought about my response. I'll transfer the house and car tomorrow. I hadn't said I'd transfer them to him. That was the part they'd missed. The sun came up at 6:14 a.m. I watched it from the front porch, coffee in hand, barefoot on the cold concrete. The neighborhood was waking up slowly. A jogger passed by, earbuds in, focused on the rhythm of her steps. A dog barked 3 houses down, the same German shepherd that barked every morning at exactly this time. Somewhere a car door slammed, followed by an engine starting. I hadn't slept, hadn't even tried. I'd spent the night sitting in the armchair, replaying the last 3 years in my head like a film I'd seen too many times but never really understood until now. The pattern had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. It started with the small things. Mara correcting Nathaniel in front of me. "Honey, that's not how you tell a story." Or, "Babe, don't interrupt." Little adjustments, little reminders that he was doing something wrong. At first, I thought it was just how couples communicated. Give and take, learning each other's rhythms. But it wasn't give and take. It was just take. Then it moved to me. "Alan, you're hovering." Or, "Alan, we're trying to have a private conversation." Always polite, always with a smile, but always a boundary being drawn. Always a line I wasn't supposed to cross. I remembered the first time she'd used my first name instead of calling me Mr. Pierce, or even just Dad. It was 3 months after the wedding. We were at a restaurant, one of those trendy places with small portions and big prices. Nathaniel had excused himself to the restroom, and Mara had leaned across the table. "Alan," she'd said, her voice sweet but somehow sharp underneath, "I think it's important we establish some boundaries. Nathaniel and I are building our own family now, and we need space to do that without interference." I'd nodded, thinking she meant they needed privacy. Time alone, normal newlywed things. But what she really meant was that I needed to disappear. Then it was the money. Nathaniel called one afternoon in July, nervous, stumbling over his words the way he used to when he was a kid, asking for permission to stay out late. "Dad, I hate to ask, but we're trying to get a car, something reliable. The down payment is more than we expected, and Mara's car just broke down, so we really need... Could you maybe help us out? Just this once? $5,000. I said yes without hesitating. Transferred it the same day from my savings account. The account I'd been building for years, putting away a little each month for emergencies or retirement, or maybe a trip I'd never take. 2 weeks later, I saw the car parked outside a restaurant downtown. I was driving past on my way home from the hardware store, happened to glance over, and there it was. A sleek gray sedan with temporary plates still in the window. And through the restaurant's front window, I could see Nathaniel and Mara inside, sitting at a booth, laughing, toasting with wine glasses, celebrating. I slowed down without meaning to. Watched them for just a moment. They looked so happy, so carefree, like people who didn't have a worry in the world. I didn't stop, didn't go in, didn't say anything, just drove home and ate canned soup for dinner that night, and the next night, and the night after that, because $5,000 was more than I could comfortably spare, and I'd made it work by cutting back everywhere else. But they didn't need to know that. A month after that, Nathaniel called again. This time, it was the security deposit for a bigger apartment. The old one was too small, too dark. The neighbors were too loud. Mara wasn't happy there. $3,000. I said yes again, transferred it again, adjusted my budget again. I never got a thank you card. Never got a call asking how I was managing. Just a text from Nathaniel a week later. "Got the place. Thanks." That was it. 2 words and a period. I stood up from the porch and walked back inside. The coffee had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. Stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard. The grass was too long again, weeds pushing up through the flower beds, the fence sagging in places, all the things I used to care about maintaining, all the things that suddenly seemed pointless. The holidays were worse. Thanksgiving, I was invited but told to bring my own food because Mara's parents were managing portions carefully for dietary reasons. I showed up with a pie, cherry, Nathaniel's favorite since he was 8 years old, and a green bean casserole my mother used to make. Mara's mother answered the door, a tall woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. She looked at the casserole dish in my hands like I'd brought in something scraped off the sidewalk. "Oh, Alan, we already have sides covered. Too many, actually. Maybe just leave that in the kitchen. We might have room in the fridge." I left it in the kitchen, set it on the counter next to 3 other casseroles that looked professionally made, watched as Mara's mother immediately pushed mine to the back, behind the others. I didn't see it again, didn't see it on the table during dinner, didn't see it when dessert was served. Later, when I went to get my dish to leave, I found it in the trash. The entire thing, untouched, still in the casserole dish. Someone had just thrown the whole thing away without even tasting it. I pulled it out, washed it in their sink while everyone laughed in the other room, and carried it home empty. Christmas was even simpler. I wasn't invited at all. Nathaniel sent a text on December 18th. "Hey Dad, Mara's family is doing a big thing this year, so we're going to skip our usual. Maybe we can catch up in January?" January came and went. No call, no visit, no catching up. I spent Christmas alone. Watched old movies on TV. It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, all the classics I used to watch with Nathaniel when he was little. Made myself a small dinner, turkey sandwich, chips, a beer. Went to bed at 9 because there was nothing else to do and no one to stay up for. On Christmas morning, my phone stayed silent. No text, no call, nothing. February 7th, Nathaniel's birthday. I called him at noon, no answer. I left a message, cheerful, brief, just wishing him a good day. No call back. I sent a card with a check for $200. Mailed it priority to make sure it arrived on time. The check was cashed 4 days later. The card was never acknowledged. March, I tried to visit. I texted ahead, asking if I could stop by on Saturday afternoon. Nathaniel replied 3 hours later. "Not a good time, Dad. Mara's stressed with work. Maybe another week?" Another week never came. April, the bookshelf incident. That one still burned. I'd seen all the books Mara kept buying, hardcovers mostly, the kind with pretty spines that looked good in photos. They were stacked on the floor, against the walls, piled on the coffee table. Every time I visited, there were more, so I built them a bookshelf. Solid oak, 6 feet tall, 3 shelves with reinforced brackets. Sanded it smooth, stained it dark walnut, sealed it with 3 coats of polyurethane. Took me 3 weekends working in the garage, measuring twice, cutting once, getting every detail perfect. I loaded it into my truck on a Sunday morning and drove to their apartment. 43 minutes in traffic. Parked in their lot and carried it up 2 flights of stairs by myself. It wasn't light. My back ached by the time I reached their door. I knocked, waited. Nathaniel opened the door, looked at the bookshelf, then at me, then back at the bookshelf. "Dad, what is this?" "A bookshelf. For all those books Mara keeps buying. Thought you could use it." His face did something complicated. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown. "We didn't ask for this." "I know, it's a gift. I saw you needed one, so I made it." Mara appeared behind him, arms crossed, wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater. She looked at the bookshelf the way you'd look at a stray dog someone left on your doorstep. "Alan," she said, her voice dripping with forced patience. "We're trying to keep the apartment minimal. Clean lines. We don't need more furniture cluttering up the space." "It's not clutter, it's functional. Look, you've got books everywhere. We like them where they are. It's our aesthetic." I looked past her into the apartment, at the books scattered across every surface, at the magazines sliding off the couch, at the general chaos that didn't look intentional or aesthetic, just messy. "It's a gift," I said again, quieter this time. She smiled. That smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. "We appreciate the thought, Alan. We really do, but no thank you." Nathaniel looked at the floor. Wouldn't meet my eyes. "Sorry, Dad." I stood there for another moment, holding the bookshelf, feeling the weight of it in my arms and the weight of something else, something heavier settling in my chest. Then I turned and carried it back down 2 flights of stairs, loaded it into the truck, drove home in silence. The bookshelf was still in my garage, leaning against the wall, gathering dust. That was 8 months ago. Since then, the visits had become shorter when they happened at all, the phone calls less frequent, the excuses more elaborate. "Mara has a work thing. We're redecorating and the place is a mess. Maybe next month when things calm down." May, I invited them to dinner at my place. Nathaniel said they'd think about it. They never did. June, I saw them at the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the produce section picking out apples when I spotted them 3 aisles over. I smiled, started to wave. Mara saw me first. Her eyes widened just slightly. She grabbed Nathaniel's arm and said something I couldn't hear. He glanced my way, and for just a second our eyes met. Then she tugged him toward a different aisle, and they disappeared around the corner. I stood there holding an apple, watching the empty space where they'd been, feeling like I'd been erased. July, Nathaniel called. I answered immediately, hopeful. Hey, Dad, quick question. Would you be willing to co-sign a loan for us? We're doing some home renovations, and the bank needs... Let me see the paperwork first, I said. I'd want to understand what I'm signing. Silence. Then, never mind. We'll figure it out another way. He hung up before I could say anything else. August, nothing. September, nothing. October, I got added to a group text. Nathaniel, Mara, and Mara's parents. An invitation to some charity fundraiser they were organizing. The message didn't address me directly, didn't even use my name, just a mass invite with details and a link to donate. I didn't respond, didn't donate, just watched as the other people in the group chat replied with enthusiasm and pledges. My silence went unnoticed. November, the text message, the final message. You're no longer family. I finished my cold coffee and set the mug in the sink, walked into the living room and looked at the photos on the mantel. Nathaniel at 5, missing his front teeth. Nathaniel at 10, holding up a soccer trophy. Nathaniel at 16, awkward in a suit before his first formal dance. All those years, all those moments, all that time I'd spent raising him, teaching him, trying to help him become a good man. And somewhere along the way, I'd lost him. Or maybe he'd lost himself. Or maybe Mara had found him first and reshaped him into something I didn't recognize. I walked back out to the front porch. The sun was higher now, the street fully awake. Jonah Briggs was in his yard again, this time watering his flower beds. He saw me and waved. I waved back, and he shut off the hose and walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. Morning, Alan. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. He nodded like he understood. Everything okay? Just thinking. Dangerous activity, he said with a small smile. Then his expression shifted, more serious. I saw your son drive by yesterday, slowed down in front of your house. Looked like he was thinking about stopping, but then he kept going. I didn't respond, just nodded. Jonah leaned against my porch railing. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me to mind my own business if you want. Go ahead. You doing okay with all that? With him? I looked at Jonah. Really looked at him. He was a good neighbor, quiet, respectful, but he noticed things. Paid attention. I'm managing, I said. He nodded slowly. I met his wife once, a couple years back. Mara, right? Right. She seemed intense, very polished, very in control. That's accurate. He was quiet for a moment, then. My younger brother married a woman like that. Took him 5 years to realize she was running his entire life, making every decision, cutting off anyone who questioned her. By the time he figured it out, he'd lost most of his friends and half his family. What did he do? Divorced her. Started over. Took him a while to rebuild everything he'd lost, but he's happier now. Got remarried to someone who actually respects him. It's like night and day. I nodded. Some people never realize it. True. Some people would rather live in the cage than admit they built it themselves. He pushed off the railing. Anyway, I'll let you get back to your morning. Just wanted to check in. And if you ever need to talk or just want some company, I'm right next door. Thanks, Jonah. He walked back to his yard, and I stayed on the porch for a few more minutes, thinking about cages and choices and all the ways people trap themselves. Then I went inside and made a list. Items I needed from the hardware store. Boxes, tape, markers, packing paper. Not because I was actually packing, not because I was actually leaving, but because I wanted people to see me buying these things. Wanted the rumor to start spreading that Alan Pierce was preparing to move, that he'd been defeated, that he was running away. Let them think that. Let Nathaniel and Mara believe they'd won, that they'd successfully pushed me out, that the house and the car and everything else would soon be theirs. Let them celebrate their victory. Because when the truth came out, when they realized what I'd actually done, the fall would be so much harder. I grabbed my keys and headed to the hardware store. The aisles were mostly empty on a weekday morning. I took my time selecting boxes, different sizes, heavy-duty tape, permanent markers, bubble wrap, everything you'd need for a real move. At the checkout, the cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, rang everything up. "Moving?" she asked. "Just organizing," I said. She smiled. "That's what everyone says." I loaded everything into the truck and drove home slowly, making sure to take the main streets where people could see me, where neighbors could notice, where word would spread. When I pulled into the driveway, Jonah was still in his yard. He saw the boxes and raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Perfect. I carried the supplies inside and stacked them in the living room, right where they'd be visible through the front window. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. Started researching property law, beneficiary structures, estate planning, estrangement clauses. I'd already done most of this work 6 months ago, already updated everything, already put the pieces in place, but I wanted to be sure. Wanted to verify every detail. Wanted to know that when this all came crashing down on them, there wouldn't be a single crack they could exploit. By lunchtime, I was satisfied. Everything was solid, everything was locked, and everything was about to change. I made a sandwich, ate it standing at the counter. Then I grabbed my phone and texted my sister. "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow morning?" She replied within 2 minutes. "I'll be there at 9. You okay?" "I'm fine. Just need to talk." "See you then." I set the phone down and looked around the kitchen. At the table where I'd read that message. At the chair where I'd sat in the dark, deciding what to do next. This was where it had started. This was where I'd made my choice. And tomorrow, I'd begin the final phase. The reckoning was coming. And Nathaniel and Mara had no idea. The bank was quiet when I arrived. Mid-morning on a Wednesday, a few customers at the counter. Soft music playing overhead. The smell of fresh coffee from the waiting area. I approached the desk and asked to speak with Mr. Calleran. The receptionist smiled and picked up the phone. A moment later, she nodded toward the hallway. "He'll see you now." Mr. Calleran's office was small but organized. Diplomas on the wall, a photo of his family on the desk. He stood when I entered and shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Pierce, good to see you. Please sit." I sat down across from him. He settled back into his chair and folded his hands on the desk. "You mentioned on the phone that you had some questions about your accounts," he said. "I do, specifically about the beneficiary structure and the property deed." He nodded and turned to his computer. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. A moment later, he looked at the screen and then back at me. "Everything appears to be in order," he said. "The updates you made 6 months ago are all active. The house, the vehicle, and the primary account are all designated to Helen Ward with the estrangement clause intact." "And that clause is legally binding?" "Absolutely. It was reviewed by your attorney and filed appropriately. In the event that the original beneficiary initiates voluntary estrangement, documented through written or electronic communication, all assets revert permanently to the updated beneficiary structure. No contest, no reversal." I leaned back in the chair. "And if the original beneficiary attempts to claim the assets anyway, they'd have no legal standing. The estrangement clause is triggered by their own actions. They've effectively removed themselves from the line of succession." I nodded slowly. "What if they claim they were coerced or manipulated?" Mr. Calleran smiled faintly. "Do you have documentation of their communication?" "I do." "Then you're protected. Text messages, emails, any written correspondence where they explicitly sever the relationship. That's all the evidence you need. The burden of proof would be on them to demonstrate coercion, and frankly, a text message that says you're no longer family is pretty definitive." I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief, just certainty. "Thank you," I said. "Is there anything else you need?" "Not today." He stood and shook my hand again. "If anything changes, let me know. But as it stands, everything is secure." I left the bank and drove to the post office. Inside, I filled out 3 certified mail forms and addressed them carefully. One to Nathaniel, one to Mara, one to Nathaniel and Mara jointly at their apartment address. The envelopes contained copies of the updated beneficiary documents, the estrangement clause, and a notarized letter from my attorney confirming the legal structure. I didn't include a personal note. There was nothing left to say. The clerk stamped the forms and handed me the receipts. "These'll be delivered within 2 business days," she said. "Perfect." I folded the receipts and put them in my wallet. Then I drove to the law office downtown. I didn't have an appointment, but the receptionist recognized me from my previous visits and waved me in. I sat in the lobby and waited. The office smelled like leather and old paper. A clock ticked on the wall. A water cooler hummed in the corner. My attorney, a woman named Victoria Lang, appeared after a few minutes. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and efficient. "Alan," she said, "come on back." I followed her into her office. She closed the door and gestured to a chair. "I assume this is about the beneficiary updates," she said. "It is. And I assume something has happened." I pulled out my phone and showed her Nathaniel's message. She read it carefully, her expression neutral. Then she handed the phone back and nodded. "That's textbook estrangement initiation," she said. "Clear, voluntary, documented. You're in a very strong position. I want to make sure there are no loopholes." "There aren't. The clause is airtight. As long as you have that message, and I recommend you screenshot it and back it up in multiple locations, you're protected. What if he tries to apologize later? What if he claims he didn't mean it?" Victoria leaned forward. "The clause doesn't care about intent. It cares about action. He initiated estrangement. The legal structure responded. That's it. He can apologize all he wants, but the assets are gone." I nodded. "And the certified letters? Good move. It creates a paper trail. Even if he claims he never received verbal notification, the certified mail proves you informed him of the consequences. It removes any argument of ignorance. When will they arrive? 2 business days, typically, so by Friday. And after that? After that, there's nothing he can do. The structure is locked, the assets are transferred. He's out." I stood up. "Thank you, Victoria." She stood as well and walked me to the door. "Alan, I know this isn't easy, but you're doing the right thing. Sometimes family isn't about genetics, it's about respect. And he stopped respecting you a long time ago." I didn't respond, just nodded and left. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and cold. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching people walk by, wondering how many of them were carrying secrets like mine, how many of them were preparing for reckonings that hadn't happened yet. I got in the truck and drove home. As I turned onto my street, I saw Jonah again, this time checking his mailbox. He waved. I waved back. He walked over as I parked. "Hey, Alan, you doing okay?" "I'm fine." He glanced at the house. "I saw your son drive by earlier. Slowed down, looked at your place, then kept going. Didn't stop." I felt a small flicker of satisfaction. "He's busy." Jonah nodded. "Yeah, probably. Although between you and me, I always got the sense his wife runs that show." "You're not wrong." He laughed. "My brother used to say the same thing about his ex. She'd make all the decisions, and he'd just go along with it. Took him years to realize he didn't have to." "Some people never realize it." Thought, true. "Anyway, I'll let you get back to your organizing." He walked back to his house, and I went inside. I made a sandwich, poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table and ate slowly, thinking about Friday, about the certified letters arriving, about Nathaniel opening the envelope and reading the documents, about the moment he'd realize what he'd done. I wondered if Mara would be there. I wondered if she'd read over his shoulder. I wondered if she'd understand immediately or if it would take her a moment. I wondered if Nathaniel would call me, if he'd beg, if he'd apologize. And I wondered if I'd answer. Probably not. Thursday morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The city park was quiet at that hour, just a few joggers and dog walkers. The trees were starting to turn, gold and red against the gray sky. I found a bench near the pond and sat down, watched the ducks gliding across the water, watched a father teaching his daughter to ride a bike on the path nearby. She kept wobbling, and he kept running alongside her, his hand on the seat, steadying her. She laughed every time she almost fell. He laughed with her. I watched them until they disappeared around a bend, and then I sat there in the silence, thinking about all the times I'd done the same thing with Nathaniel, all the scraped knees and training wheels and patient afternoons in the driveway. I wondered if he remembered any of it. I wondered if Mara had convinced him those memories didn't matter. A woman sat down on the bench beside me. Older. Gray hair pulled back in a bun. She had a bag of bread and started tearing off pieces, tossing them to the ducks. "Beautiful morning," she said. "It is." "You come here often?" "Not as much as I used to." She nodded. "I come every Thursday. It's peaceful. Good place to think." It is." She tossed another piece of bread. A duck snapped it up immediately. "You look like you've got something heavy on your mind," she said. I glanced at her. "That obvious?" She smiled. I've been around long enough to recognize the look. I didn't respond, just watched the ducks. "Family trouble?" she asked. "Something like that." She nodded again. "It's always family, isn't it? Friends come and go. Jobs change. But family, that's the weight that sticks." "Yeah. You doing okay with it?" I looked at her. She was watching the pond, not me. Like she was asking casually. Like it didn't matter whether I answered or not. "I'm doing what I need to do," I said. She tossed the last piece of bread into the water. That's all any of us can do. She stood up, brushed the crumbs off her hands, and walked away without another word. I sat there for another 20 minutes, thinking about her question. Was I okay? I wasn't sure. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt clear, like I'd finally stopped pretending. I left the park and drove downtown. I didn't have anywhere specific to go. Just needed to move, needed to see the city, needed to remind myself that life was bigger than one manipulative daughter-in-law and one weak son. I parked near a cafe and went inside, ordered another coffee, sat by the window and watched people walk by. A couple stopped outside, arguing. The woman gestured sharply. The man looked at the ground. She said something else, and he nodded. She turned and walked away. He stood there for a moment, then followed. I wondered if that was Nathaniel and Mara in 10 years, or 5, or next week. I wondered if he'd ever stand up to her, if he'd ever realize what he'd given up. Probably not. I finished my coffee and went back to the truck. As I climbed in, my phone buzzed. A notification, group chat, I opened it. Mara had posted a message. Exciting news, fresh starts, and new beginnings. So grateful for the people who truly support us. There was a photo attached. Nathaniel and Mara standing in front of a real estate office, grinning, holding a folder. I stared at the photo for a long time. They thought they were buying a house, thought they were moving forward, thought the money was already theirs. I closed the message and put the phone away. Let them celebrate. Let them plan. Let them imagine their perfect future. Tomorrow, the letters would arrive, and everything they thought they knew would collapse. I drove home and spent the rest of the day in my office, organizing files, reviewing documents, making sure everything was exactly where it needed to be. I labeled folders. I scanned receipts. I backed up digital copies to 3 separate drives. By the time the sun set, everything was perfect. I made dinner, reheated leftovers, ate at the kitchen table, washed the dishes, turned off the lights, and then I sat in the armchair by the window and waited for tomorrow. Friday arrived cold and gray. I woke up before dawn and made coffee. Stood at the kitchen window watching the street slowly come to life. A mail truck passed by at 7:43 a.m. I tracked it with my eyes until it turned the corner and disappeared. The certified letters were on their way. I spent the morning cleaning, vacuumed the living room, wiped down the counters, organized the garage, not because the house was dirty, just because I needed something to do with my hands. Around 11, my phone rang. Helen. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I am." "Good. I just wanted to check in, make sure you're okay." "I'm fine." "Alan, you don't have to pretend with me." "I'm not pretending. I'm fine." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Call me if you need anything." "I will." She hung up. I set the phone down and went back to the garage, moved a few boxes around, straightened a stack of old magazines, found the bookshelf again, still leaning against the wall, still untouched. I ran my hand over the surface one more time. Then I picked up a marker and wrote on the side in large letters. For donation. Let it go to someone who'd actually use it. Someone who'd appreciate the work that went into it. Someone who wasn't Nathaniel. I spent another hour in the garage, sorting through old tools and equipment. Found a box of Nathaniel's childhood drawings, yellowed with age. Stick figures and misspelled words. Best Dad, written in crayon. I closed the box without looking further and pushed it back onto the shelf. The past could stay in the past. At 1:30 p.m., I made lunch, a sandwich and some fruit. Ate standing at the counter, staring at nothing in particular. The house felt different today, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. At 2:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Community event, 6:00 p.m., main hall. I'd set the reminder 2 weeks ago. It was a local fundraiser, music, food, silent auction. The kind of thing Nathaniel and Mara always attended because Mara liked being seen. I'd received the invitation in the mail, a glossy card with gold lettering. I'd RSVP'd yes and then forgotten about it until now, but now it felt like fate. I checked the time. Just under 4 hours. Enough time to prepare properly. Enough time to rehearse what I wanted to say. Enough time to make sure every detail was perfect. I showered, shaved carefully, put on a clean shirt and slacks. Nothing fancy. Just presentable. Professional. Then I went to my office and opened the filing cabinet. Pulled out a leather briefcase I hadn't used in months. Dusted it off. Opened it and placed 3 folders inside. Folder 1, updated beneficiary documents. Folder 2, estrangement clause and legal opinion. Folder 3, certified mail receipts and copies of Nathaniel's messages. I closed the briefcase and set it by the door, Then I sat down at the kitchen table and waited. The minutes crawled by. I made more coffee, drank it slowly, watched the clock on the wall tick forward. 3 cal p.m. 3:30 p.m. 4 wal p.m. At 4:15 p.m., I stood up and walked to the front window. Looked out at the street, a few cars passing by, a dog walker, normal life continuing as if nothing was about to change. But something was about to change. Everything was about to change. At 4:47 p.m., I drove past the downtown restaurant where Nathaniel and Mara liked to eat. I didn't plan to, just happened to take that route. And there they were, sitting on the patio, champagne glasses, big smiles, Mara's hand on Nathaniel's arm, celebrating. I slowed down just enough to get a clear look. Nathaniel was laughing. Mara was leaning in, whispering something in his ear. She gestured with her free hand, animated, excited. He nodded eagerly, his face bright with anticipation. They looked happy, confident, victorious. They thought they'd won, thought the hard part was over, thought the future was theirs to design. I drove past without stopping, let them have this moment, let them toast their success, let them believe they'd finally gotten rid of me. Because in about 90 minutes, I was going to stand on a stage in front of 200 people and show them exactly how wrong they were. I parked outside the community hall at 5:52 p.m. The parking lot was already half full. People were streaming toward the entrance, dressed in casual business attire, chatting and laughing. I grabbed the briefcase and walked inside. The hall was decorated with string lights and banners. Tables lined the walls, covered with auction items. A small stage at the far end, a microphone stand in the center. I spotted Nathaniel and Mara near the refreshment table. Mara was wearing a red dress. Nathaniel was in a gray suit. They were talking to a couple I didn't recognize, smiling and nodding. Mara touched the woman's arm, laughing at something. Nathaniel stood slightly behind her, his posture mimicking hers. I stayed near the entrance, watching, studying them, memorizing this moment. The last moment before everything changed. At 6:04 p.m., the event coordinator stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We have an exciting night planned, and we're so grateful for your support. Applause. She continued. Before we begin the auction, we have a few special announcements. First, I'd like to invite Alan Pierce to the stage. My name echoed through the hall. I saw Nathaniel's head snap up, saw Mara's eyes widen, saw the confusion flash across both their faces. I walked toward the stage, briefcase in hand, keeping my expression calm, neutral, controlled. People parted to let me through. Some nodded in recognition. Others watched curiously. The coordinator smiled and handed me the microphone. Thank you, I said. The room went quiet. 200 faces turned toward me, waiting. I looked out at the crowd, found Nathaniel and Mara in the center. They were frozen, watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Confusion, wariness, the first hints of fear, and right in that moment, I knew I had them. I opened the briefcase and pulled out the first folder. I want to talk about family, I said. About what it means, about what it costs, and about what happens when you take it for granted. The room stayed silent. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed, but most just stared, waiting. I held up the first document. This is the deed to my house, I said. The house I've owned for 32 years. The house where I raised my son. The house he assumed would be his one day. Nathaniel's face went pale. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. 3 years ago, my son got married. I was happy for him. I wanted him to build a life. I wanted him to succeed. So when he asked for help with a down payment on a car, I gave him $5,000. When he asked for help with a security deposit, I gave him $3,000 more. I never asked for it back. Never expected gratitude. It was what fathers do. I paused. Let the words settle. Let them sink into the silence. But over time, something changed. The visits became shorter. The phone calls stopped. The invitations disappeared. I was excluded from holidays, ignored at family gatherings, dismissed when I tried to help. And I told myself it was temporary, that he was just busy, that things would get better. I looked directly at Nathaniel. He was staring at the floor now, his shoulders hunched. Mara's hand was on his arm, her knuckles white. Her jaw was clenched tight. I brought them a bookshelf I'd built, spent 3 weekends on it, solid oak, carried it up 2 flights of stairs by myself. They told me they didn't need it, told me to take it back. So I did. A few people in the crowd exchanged glances. Murmurs started to ripple through the room. I showed up for birthdays, got ignored. I sent cards with money. The checks were cashed. The cards were never acknowledged. I invited them to dinner. They said they'd think about it. They never did. I let the microphone drop slightly, my voice quieter but somehow more powerful. Then, 3 nights ago, I received a text message. It said, "You're no longer family. Don't call, don't visit. This is final." The murmurs grew louder. I heard someone gasp, saw heads turning, people looking at each other, then back at me. I replied that I would transfer the house and car the next day. And I did, just not to him. Nathaniel looked up. His eyes were wide, confused, desperate. Mara's face had gone from pale to red. She leaned toward Nathaniel, whispering something harsh and fast. He shook his head slightly, still staring at me. I held up the second document. This is the updated beneficiary structure. 6 months ago, after being turned away one too many times, I changed everything. The house, the car, the accounts, all of it. I removed my son as the beneficiary and designated my sister instead. More murmurs. Louder now. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A man near the back leaned forward in his seat. But I didn't stop there. I added a clause. A legal provision that stated if the original beneficiary, my son, initiated voluntary estrangement, all assets would revert permanently to the new beneficiary. No reversal, no contest. I held up my phone and turned it toward the crowd, the screen glowing with the message. This is the message he sent me. You're no longer family. Voluntary, documented, irreversible. Nathaniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Dad, wait. I raised a hand, my voice cutting through the room. I'm not finished. He froze. Mara tugged at his sleeve, but he didn't sit down. Just stood there, trembling. I held up the third document. These are certified mail receipts. This morning, 3 letters were delivered. 1 to Nathaniel, 1 to Mara. 1 to both of them jointly. Each letter contained copies of the updated beneficiary documents, the estrangement clause, and a legal opinion confirming the structure. Mara's face had gone from red to almost purple. She was whispering something furious to Nathaniel, her voice sharp enough that people nearby could hear the tone even if they couldn't make out the words. Those letters also included a notification that effective immediately, all financial connections between us are severed. The house is no longer in play, the car is no longer in play, the accounts are no longer in play. He is no longer in play. The crowd was completely silent now, not even the sound of breathing. Just absolute, stunned silence. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage and looked directly at Nathaniel, locked eyes with him. You sent me a message telling me I wasn't family anymore. You made that choice, you drew that line, and I respected it. I honored it, I formalized it. So congratulations, Nathaniel. You're free. Free from my interference. Free from my presence. And free from my assets. Nathaniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No sound came out. His eyes filled with tears. Mara stood up beside him, her chair toppling backward. This is insane. You can't just... I turned to her, my voice calm but cold. I can. And I did. Your husband initiated estrangement. The legal structure responded. It's done. She looked at Nathaniel, her face contorted with rage. Do something. Say something. Don't just stand there. He didn't move, just stood there, shaking, his face crumpling. I turned back to the crowd, swept my gaze across all 200 faces. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. Respect isn't optional. Family isn't a transaction. And if you treat someone like they're disposable, don't be surprised when they take you at your word. I closed the briefcase with a sharp snap that echoed through the silent hall. The certified letters were delivered this morning. The legal structure is locked. The assets are transferred. There is no appeal. There is no reversal. It's over. I handed the microphone back to the coordinator. Her hand trembled as she took it. Thank you for your time, I said to the crowd. Then I stepped off the stage and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted like water. People pressed back against their tables, creating a clear path. Some stared at me. Others looked at Nathaniel. No one said a word. As I reached the door, I heard Mara's voice behind me, sharp and frantic. Nate, call him. Stop him. Fix this. Do something. You fool. Do something. Nathaniel's voice, small and broken. I didn't look back. Just pushed through the door and walked into the parking lot. The night air was cold and sharp. I took a deep breath and felt the weight lift off my shoulders. Felt 32 years of disappointment and dismissal fall away in a single moment. It was done. I got in the truck and started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed. One notification, then another, then a flood of them, vibrating continuously in my pocket. I glanced at the screen at a red light. 47 missed calls, all from Nathaniel. I turned the phone off and drove home. The house was dark when I arrived. I parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. It was over. No more pretending, no more waiting, no more watching my son choose someone else's approval over my presence. I grabbed the briefcase and went inside, flipped on the kitchen light, set the briefcase on the table, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the sink, looking out at the backyard. The grass needed mowing again. The fence needed a coat of paint. Small things, normal things, things I could handle. My phone was still off. I'd left it that way on purpose. I didn't want to hear the excuses. Didn't want to hear Nathaniel's voice cracking as he tried to apologize. Didn't want to hear Mara's icy commands in the background, telling him what to say. It was too late for apologies. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. 8:47 p.m. I wondered if they were still at the event. Wondered if they'd left immediately after my announcement or if they'd stayed, trying to salvage their image. Probably the latter. Mara wouldn't leave without attempting damage control. She'd stand there with a forced smile, making excuses, spinning the narrative, trying to paint me as the villain. Let her try. 200 people had heard the truth. 200 witnesses who'd seen the documents, who'd heard the words, who'd watched Nathaniel stand there speechless while his wife screamed at him. The truth was out there now. Permanent. Unchangeable. I wondered if Nathaniel had opened the certified letter yet. Wondered if he'd read every word or just skimmed it, hoping there was some loophole he'd missed. There wasn't. Victoria had made sure of that. Every clause airtight. Every provision legally sound. Every detail documented and filed. I walked into the living room and sat down in the armchair by the window. The street was quiet. A few porch lights glowing. The neighbor's cat prowling through a yard across the street. Peaceful. I thought about the look on Nathaniel's face when I'd held up the documents. The confusion, the panic, the realization that he'd miscalculated, that he'd underestimated me, that he'd assumed I was too weak or too sentimental to follow through. He was wrong. I thought about Mara's expression. The anger, the disbelief, the certainty collapsing right in front of her. She'd probably spent the last 3 days celebrating. Probably told her friends she'd finally gotten rid of the burdensome extra. Probably bragged about how easily she'd guided Nathaniel into sending that message. She'd miscalculated too. And I thought about the crowd. The murmurs, the wide eyes, the way they'd parted as I walked out, like I was someone who'd just revealed a secret they couldn't unsee. Good. Let them talk. Let them tell their friends. Let the story spread through the community like wildfire. Let everyone know what happens when you take someone for granted. I stood up and walked to the garage, flipped on the light, and looked at the bookshelf one more time. For donation, the marker still read. I picked it up and carried it outside. Set it on the curb with a sign. Free. Please take. By tomorrow morning, it would be gone. Someone else would take it home, sand it down if they wanted, stain it a different color, use it for books or tools or whatever they needed. It would have a new life, a better life, just like me. I went back inside and locked the door, turned off the lights, walked upstairs to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was quiet. Just the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the creak of the house settling, the distant sound of a car passing by on the main road. I thought about turning my phone back on, just to see how many messages had piled up. But I didn't. Not tonight. Tonight, I wanted the silence. Wanted to sit in the stillness and let everything settle. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. Thought about the last 3 years. All the small cuts, all the dismissals, all the moments where I'd convinced myself it wasn't that bad, that I was overreacting, that things would improve. They never did. Because Nathaniel had made his choice a long time ago. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Mara had rewritten him page by page, and he'd let her. He'd chosen her version of himself over the person he used to be, over the son who used to leave drawings on the refrigerator, over the boy who cried when he stepped on a beetle. That boy was gone, and the man who replaced him wasn't my son anymore. But now I could see that clearly, and I'd responded accordingly. I closed my eyes and let sleep pull me under. Saturday morning came with sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. I woke up at 6:30 a.m., feeling more rested than I had in months. I made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, watching the neighbors' kids playing in their yard, laughing, running, normal. I turned my phone back on. 73 missed calls, 61 text messages, 12 voicemails, all from Nathaniel. I scrolled through the notifications without opening them, just watched the timestamps. The calls had started at 7:52 p.m. last night and continued until 3:14 a.m., almost every few minutes at first, then spreading out as exhaustion set in. Desperation. The text messages were worse. Preview snippets showed fragments. "Dad, please. I didn't mean. We need to talk. Mara says, I'm begging you." I deleted the notifications without reading the full messages, without listening to the voicemails. There was nothing he could say that would change anything. Nothing he could promise that I'd believe. Nothing he could offer that I wanted. Then I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, orange juice. Sat at the table and ate slowly, savoring the quiet. At 9:23 a.m., there was a knock on the door. I set down my fork and walked to the front window. Looked out. Nathaniel's car was parked in the driveway. He was standing on the porch, looking exhausted. Red eyes, rumpled clothes, the same gray suit from last night, wrinkled now, like he hadn't slept, like he'd been driving around all night trying to figure out what to do. I opened the door, but didn't step outside. "Dad," he said. His voice was hoarse, wrecked. "We need to talk." "No, we don't. Please, just 5 minutes." "You said I wasn't family, Nathaniel. You made that very clear." "I didn't mean it. Mara was upset, and Mara wrote that message," I said. "You just hit send." He flinched like I'd struck him. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I should have stood up to her. You should have respected me. You should have valued me. You should have treated me like a father instead of an inconvenience." His eyes filled with tears. His hands trembled. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. No, we can't. You triggered the estrangement clause. The assets are gone. There's nothing to fix. Dad, please. I'll do anything. I'll apologize to Helen. I'll make it right. I'll leave Mara. You'll leave Mara? I raised an eyebrow. Is that what this is about? You've already calculated what's worth more, her or the house? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's exactly what it is. You're only here because you lost something you thought was yours, not because you actually care about me. That's not true. Nathaniel, I kept my voice calm, steady. You made a choice. I respected that choice. Now you live with it. But I didn't understand. Yes, you did. You just didn't think I'd follow through. You thought I'd cave. You thought I'd forgive you and hand everything over because that's what I've always done. But not this time. He stared at me, tears streaming down his face. Dad, I'm your son. You told me you weren't. You told me I was no longer family. So that's what I became, nothing. I didn't mean it. Then you shouldn't have said it. He broke, collapsed onto the porch steps, sobbing. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. Mara's furious. She's blaming me for everything. She's saying I ruined our future. She's saying I'm worthless. She's saying... That's not my problem. He looked up at me, his face a mess of tears and snot and desperation. How can you be so cold? I'm not cold, Nathaniel. I'm just done. But you're my father. And you were my son. Past tense. He let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. What am I supposed to do? Grow up, take responsibility. Stop letting other people run your life. She'll leave me. If I don't fix this, she'll leave me. I looked down at him, this broken man on my porch, this stranger who used to be my son. Then maybe that's what needs to happen, I said. He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock, with betrayal. And then I stepped back inside and closed the door. He stayed on the porch for another 15 minutes, crying, begging, pleading through the door, his voice rising and falling, sometimes angry, sometimes desperate, sometimes just broken. I didn't respond. Eventually, I heard him stand up, heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard his car door open and close, heard the engine start. I watched through the window as he sat in the driver's seat, his face buried in his hands, his body shaking. Then he pulled out of the driveway and drove away slowly, like he was hoping I'd run out and stop him. I didn't, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no regret, no sadness, just clarity. I finished my breakfast, washed the dishes, went about my day. At 11 a.m., Helen called. I heard what happened, she said. News travels fast. Alan, are you okay? I'm fine. He came to you, didn't he? He did. What did you say? I told him the truth. She was quiet for a moment. Then, good. You did what you had to do. He's your nephew, Helen. And you're my brother. You've been there for me my whole life. He hasn't. I made my choice a long time ago, Alan. just like you made yours. He had every opportunity to be a decent person. He chose not to be. Thank you. Don't thank me. You did this yourself. I'm just proud of you for finally standing up, for finally seeing your own worth. We talked for a few more minutes. She asked if I needed anything. I said no. She reminded me that the house transfer paperwork would be finalized next week. I said I knew. Then she hung up. I spent the rest of the day organizing. I cleaned out closets, sorted through old boxes, found photos of Nathaniel as a kid, smiling, happy, innocent. I didn't throw them away, just packed them into a box and put them in the attic. They were memories, history, but they weren't my present, and they weren't my future. By evening, the house felt lighter, cleaner, like I'd finally swept out years of dust and cobwebs and things I'd been carrying too long. I made dinner, sat on the back porch with a beer, and watched the sun set behind the trees. Tomorrow, I'd start fresh. New routines, new plans, new boundaries. But tonight, I just sat, breathed, existed, free. Sunday morning, I drove to Helen's house with the briefcase. She met me at the door. Come in. We sat in her living room. I handed her the documents. She reviewed them carefully, her reading glasses perched on her nose. It's done, she said. Everything's transferred, legal, binding. Good. Alan, I know this wasn't easy. It was easier than you'd think. She looked at me over her glasses. No regrets. None. And if he comes back? He won't. But if he does, the answer is no. She set the papers down. I'm proud of you. You've said that? Because it's true. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it. Unknown number. Probably Nathaniel calling from somewhere else. I declined it. Helen noticed. Still trying? He'll stop eventually. And Mara? She's probably already looking for her next target. Helen laughed, sharp and bitter. Probably. We talked for another hour, about the future, about her plans for the property, about moving forward. Then I stood to leave. Alan? Yeah? You won. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the truth in her eyes. I had won. Not because I got revenge, not because I hurt them back, but because I set a boundary and enforced it. Because I valued myself enough to walk away. Because I stopped accepting disrespect disguised as family. That was the victory. I drove home one last time, walked through the empty rooms, touched the walls, said goodbye to 32 years. Then I locked the door behind me and got in the truck. My phone rang again. Nathaniel. I answered this time. Dad? Don't call me again. Please just... I hung up, blocked the number, deleted his contact, started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller. The street disappeared, the neighborhood faded, and ahead of me, the road stretched out into something new. I pressed the accelerator. Forward, into the life I'd earned. Victorious.